So if you were to give somebody a roadmap on what they could do to get to this really desired place of true intimacy, sexual intimacy even, what would that look like?
Welcome to the Kickass Couples Podcast. This is the place where we help committed couples who want to level up their marriage experience newfound clarity, hope, and confidence. We're Matthew and Kim, co-hosts and husband and wife.
In 26 years together, we've seen a lot and never thought it could be as good as it is right now. We're here to help you successfully navigate the messy, dirty, and wonderful world of marriage.
We believe all couples deserve and are capable of experiencing an extraordinary and fulfilling marriage. And each week, we're bringing you life lessons from real-life successful couples to help you grow and strengthen your relationship.
We'll get started right after this message.
If you want to learn how to experience the best, most fulfilling year of your marriage, we invite you to order Matthew's new book, Kickass Husband, Winning at Life, Marriage, and Sex. You can get it at Amazon.com or visit Matthew's website, www.matthewphoffman.com. Again, that's Amazon.com or www.matthewphoffman.com. And now, back to the show.
Are you tired of feeling like you and your partner are drifting apart? Do you want to reignite that spark and keep your love life honeymoon hot? First and foremost, communication is key. It's important to have open and honest conversations about your desires and boundaries in order to establish a strong foundation for intimacy. From there, you can explore different activities and techniques that fulfill both you and your partner's needs and wants. Join Kim and me along with one of our Elite KCN coaches as we explore the secrets to creating an intimate bond that will last a lifetime. Chris Cambas is an Elite KCN coach who is committed to assisting couples in strengthening their bonds through cutting-edge processes and therapeutic methods. Through intensives, retreats, seminars, and online workshops, he has helped over 30,000 people through the in-person and tele-health marriage counseling he co-founded. He graduated from Liberty University with a master's degree and possesses undergraduate and graduate degrees from the University of Tampa. He is also a Certified Gottman Trainer and a Certified Gottman Method Couples Therapist. Whether you're a newlywed or seasoned couple, this discussion will have something for everyone. So grab a glass of wine, light some candles, and get ready to take your relationship to new heights. Welcome back to the Kickass Couples Podcast. We are excited to be bringing you a special episode today with quite the expert, and we're going to be talking about how to have red-hot intimacy with your partner. Joining us today is our special panelist, Chris Cambas, who is an LMFT. He's also an Elite KCN therapist. He's the co-author of this amazing book called Kickass Husband, Winning at Life, Marriage, and Sex. And this young guy has had over 35,000 hours of face-to-face counseling, therapy, and training. So if he doesn't know it, I don't know who would. So Chris, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Always love to be here. And, I love the book too. My clients always ask me about the book.
Well, do they buy it, Chris, though? Are they buying the book?
I refer them to it, the guys, right? The women will buy it easily. It's getting the guys to actually read it, right?
So the guys to read it. I know. Yeah, maybe we got to do a Cliff Notes version so that the men can get it in a minute a day. I don't know what it's going to take. But this episode today is about everybody dreams, yearns, and really wants to have their own most important, intimate human relationship be full of the most amazing sex, red-hot intimacy, yet so very few people seem to be experiencing that in their relationship. And today we're going to explore, discuss, and try to create a roadmap, if we can. What can a couple, each partner in that relationship, do to experience this kind of steamy, satisfying sex life and deep intimacy? I know we don't have hours and hours, Chris, so we're gonna just hit the high level here and start with some questions. And I'm gonna kick it off with the first question: why are so few people living in this kind of relationship nirvana right now? Like, why are so many chasing it and they just don't seem to be there?
Yeah, Matt, I think the idea is this, pulling back from the sex component, people get married because it's the next thing to do, right? And then they have kids because it's the next thing to do without any comprehension of the magnitude of the commitments that they're making. And then life bulldozes them, right? And they kind of hit this existential crisis of, this it? Is this it? So they become very dissatisfied in life and they project this stuff onto their partner. And so relationships are bad, right? Like 67% of first marriages fail in the first 40 years. 50% of those happen in the first 7 years. 70% a second, 73% a third. Average age of marriage 29. Average age of first affair is 36 and a half. And so the idea of getting married because it's the next thing to do, and on and on and on, it leaves people wanting, right? It leaves them wanting, and as life bulldozes them, they yearn for more, and so the relationships go sour, right? Go sour. The average length of the first marriage is about 7.9 years. So relationships go south, right? And who wants to have sex with somebody they're not feeling, connected to, close to, right? So how do we ultimately get there? We have to build out, good relationships, right? But that requires commitment, right? Which is ultimately a discipline. It's not motivation. It's just a discipline. I'm going to commit to you, to commit to this relationship, which is larger than us, right? It's marriage we have is larger than us. And I'm going to commit every day, right? I'm going to be disciplined every day to do the things that are going to create a great relationship. And in doing that, right, we can connect. We can have great sex, not every time, right? But we can have some great sex, right? We can go rent a room at the Ritz in Naples for the weekend, have a great night, have a great weekend, and we can have, passionate sex, right? Other times it's just going to be, this one's for you or this one's for you. And that's kind of the idea, right? But the ultimate reason why people aren't having really passionate sex is because they're fundamentally, not into their partner. Bottom line, right? They got married just because it was the next thing to do.
What I hear you saying is the sex that's not amazing, steamy, hot, rewarding, and incredible stems from, it's not a functional thing, really. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but it's about the lack of genuine, equal, bilateral commitment to the relationship and to the person.
Yeah, and a really understanding of, on the very front end, what this marriage thing is. It's not just another, check mark in life. Esther Perel talks about this, but she does it. She tickles people's ears, meaning she would say, you're not mature if you can't handle your partner having, extramarital affairs, right? And the only way you can really get your kink on is if you just, go have these one night stands. Well, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. The real issue is, as I said, people are getting married because it's the next thing to do, right? Without any thought into, 50 years is a long time. 50 years is a long time. And how am I going to keep just the passion and the desire, and I'm not even talking about sex, the passion, the desire going for you, right? For the next 50 years. Much less. I mean, we haven't even gotten to sex, but how am I going to stay into you for the next 40, 50, 60 years? Yeah. So this is the real issue, right? How do we buy a new car, guys, and we love it. And 6 months later, it's like, it's a car. And so this is the problem with human beings, right? We're really bad at committing to anything. And when we think about relationships, we're not thinking about this thing is larger than me, right? We're not living in that regard. We're just living as, for ourselves in a lot of ways. Yeah. And so relationships go south. When you think about it, average age of first affair, is 36 and a half. That's like 7.5 years later after average age of first marriage. I mean, we're disastrous at these things. Absolute disasters.
I love that you brought up, what Esther says, because I think others have, scientifically been able to prove that monogamous sex is the very best. And that being in a relationship where you care about each other's well-being and are really focused on one another is the best source of intimacy that you will ever feel.
Completely. Anything short of it. Look, you can go out to a bar, meet somebody, and go swing from chandeliers, but it's empty. right? It's going to be empty. And I would argue at the end of the day or at the end of the night, you're not going to feel really good about yourself, right? I would make the argument when I'm committing to something larger than me, this marriage, this relationship, and I'm doing every day, I'm getting up and I'm having the discipline to commit to you and to turn towards you in all things, that we can create passionate sex, not every time, but we can create some really passionate moments that are more than just physical sex, more eyeball to eyeball, soul to soul. I mean, like two souls dancing, right? And I think that's what we're shooting for, not just doing backflips from chandeliers.
So we don't have to be an expert at sexual practices or, be a devotee of Karma Sutra or any of those, out there crazy sex things to have an exciting and intimate sex life.
Completely. What we want, what we're shooting for, and John Gottman talks about this, is personal sex. Eyeball to eyeball, soul to soul, right? Like the intermingling of two souls. That's what we want. That's the passion. That's the real passion. Everything else is just physical, and it's about me. I'm just taking needs.
Yeah. Yeah. So the depth comes from touching the other person's inner part soul and you're connecting with them on a deeper level. It's not just physicality is part of it, but if that's the motive, it's going to be empty because you're measuring it on the gauge of how did it feel? How did it feel for me? How did it feel for you? How did it feel? As opposed to how did we connect? How do we get more into each other? How did we have that shared experience? And so, Chris, you talk about commitment and kind of thinking about the magnitude of those things, but what's the first step? If I want to start getting closer and more intimate with my wife and have that goal, what's the first thing a couple should do?
Realizing that absolutely every single interaction I have with my partner, every interaction, one of two things is going to happen. I'm going to add to the basis of trust, or I'm going to take away from it. I'm texting and my wife speaks to me. It's a sliding door, right? I can ignore her. I just took a little bit away from trust. I can stop and engage her. I just add a little bit too. So the thought of every interaction that I have with you, every one, I'm doing one of those two things. So the first thing we can do is start turning toward. We're never going to be perfect at it, but it has to really, truly be the trend line. Right? Mm-hmm. And doing that, we're developing trust, right? Ultimately, trustworthiness, right? And it makes the relationship feel better. If I'm continually turning away, I'm texting what you're talking to me, I'm sending you the message, I don't care, right? And you're only going to absorb that message so many times before all things become possible for you.
So it's an intentional time of turning towards every time somebody's making a bid for your attention.
Absolutely.
Rather than away. That contributes to the trust.
100%. 100%.
Is it wrong to think about? So is it wrong for me to think about every interaction is either a positive or a negative deposit towards creating that if the end is to be more intimate and closer to have a really steamy, great relationship, is it wrong for me to think, I'm not motivated to do that only in my interaction, but every time I relate or don't relate to my partner, it's either making that stronger or dampening it and pouring cold water on it, right?
Absolutely. It's not like one such moment's not going to wreck the relationship, but if the trend line is constantly turning away, the message you're continually sending is, I don't care, right? And how long is that person going to absorb the message of you don't care, right? They're only going to take it for so long. Distance is being created, right? Distances, and the more distance we're creating, the closer we're getting to some form of betrayal. That makes sense?
Yeah. So if the consistency over time message is you don't care, you're not engaged, you're not leaning in and turning towards me, then not only are you disconnecting from the relationship, but you're going to start to have your needs met, emotional, spiritual, intellectual, sexual, physical, someplace else.
Yeah. And I would argue the idea of turning away, right? Turning away from your partner is a form of betrayal, right? When it's the trend line, right? When the trend line is I just turn away from you, I would argue that's a form of betrayal.
Because you're choosing not, and turning away you would define as an active choice to not engage?
Yeah, I'm just not interested. I'm more interested in sending out my text. I'm more interested in watching this TV show. I'm more interested in going to the ball game. I'm more interested in everything else than you.
But you, yeah.
Right. Got it.
So if you were to give somebody a roadmap on what they could do to get to this really desired place of true intimacy, sexual intimacy even, what would that look like?
Yeah, I think the starting point would I'd say this: search your soul relative to commitment into this relationship. Like, do you legitimately see yourself in this thing 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, 30, 40 years down the line? If you do, I would start the process of really getting to know your partner. We don't know our spouses, guys. I mean, we spend very little time, if any at all, sitting down and exploring and asking questions about their world, particularly their internal world. Get to know your partner, right? And in that process, right, you're working on friendship and intimacy. It's also a way of turning toward, right? It also opens up the door for you to be able to share fondness and admiration, those type of things. That's going to start laying the foundation it starts laying the foundation for a great friendship, right? And the research is clear. Men and women, top on their agendas, they want a good friendship. And once we have a good friendship rolling, it's much easier to deal with conflict or anything else. And it opens up the door for, good intimacy for sure.
Yeah. So get to know yourself first. I think that's a really important step. You have to ask yourself questions. What am I looking for? What are my expectations? You have to be able to answer those questions for yourself before you can actually take those to your partner.
Yeah. And, the first step is, do I really see myself in this thing for the long run? Right? Or am I just kind of here? Did I just sort of get married because it was the next thing to do? And I'm just sort of here, just grinding it out. That's not commitment. It's never going to create any type of passion inside the relationship itself.
Right. And I think, Chris, in a new relationship too, it seems that people want to jump to the dessert first. It's like, let's connect, let's have, it's exciting, it's passionate. So the physical need trumps the development of that friendship system. And it's kind of like, how can you choose to be intimate with somebody when you're not even friends? Because it's a one night stand, right? I mean, it's all about the event. It's not about the relationship or the connection. And so it seems that people, if you're in a new relationship, it's like develop the friendship first, make sure you like the person and you like spending time with them. Then you build, that's the building block, as you said, kind of the foundation of getting to have great intimacy. And even if you've been together with somebody and married in that relationship, if that friendship system isn't strong, it's a wall. You're never going to really be able to get to that intimacy and that great sex, are you?
Not at all. I think of the book, The Song of Solomon, right? And so they're talking, this couple's kind of heating up, right? They're moving toward engagement and wedding night and whatnot. And so there's this, conversation in and around premarital sex, is the idea. And it says, catch the little foxes, right, who are ruining the vineyard. And the idea is foxes go in and they'll eat the buds of, different flowers and retarding the growth of the field, right? And so that's the idea. I mean, to your point, when we just jump into having sex, right, we kind of start retarding the growth of the relationship itself. That makes sense?
It does.
Definitely.
Because it's just a physical thing. We're just, blasting chemicals through our body. When in fact, right, if I'm going to do 50 years with you, I really need to realize I'm in a state of limerence. So I'm seeing things in a completely delusional way, right? I need to account for that. And I need to ask serious questions about these red flags that are actually there that I'm just overlooking because, we're doing triple backflips from the chandelier on Friday night. Make sense?
It does. Are there conversations that men and women should have with their partners about sex and intimacy?
Are you tired of feeling like you're living with a roommate instead of a lover? Do you miss the days when you were completely into each other, intellectually, emotionally, and physically? The truth is, many couples are struggling behind closed doors. Putting on a brave face for the rest of the world is exhausting. If you want to get back your joy, return to thriving, and take pleasure in your marriage, then Kickass Couples Coaching and Matthew P. Hoffman are here to help. Join us alone or with your partner and start taking steps towards overcoming the pain-filled obstacles and improving your relationship right now. For a limited time, we're offering a free relationship assessment call. Go to MatthewPHoffman.com/coaching to book your free call now so you can start making real changes in your most important relationship today.
I think the idea of sexuality as a whole, well, as a matter of fact, it's one thing that we know couples globally really don't talk about other than Hispanic Latino, meaning likes, dislikes, fantasies, desires. And so I think it's extremely important for couples to sit down and openly discuss sexuality, their likes, their dislikes, their fantasies, desires, all these types of things, and what their perspective is, what their appetite is, so to speak. And so there's a good baseline, there's real understanding. At the same time, just because I understand your likes and dislikes, fantasies, desires, all these things, doesn't mean that I might not have a personal boundary. Mm-hmm. So, a completely open conversation in and around sexuality. No hold bars, right? The reality is we all think the same thoughts about sex. We all have the same type of fantasies around sex. And to just have an open, honest conversation about these type of things and discuss what you're really looking for from a sexuality perspective in this relationship is a necessity. It's a must. Obviously, lovingly, in a caring way, but it's important to have these conversations. I have clients that will have affairs because they have, these fantasies, but they won't bring them to the table in the relationship. So they step outside of the relationship to kind of have these one-night stands, fulfill these fantasies, right? As opposed to just bringing them to their partner and saying, hey, this is something that I'd like to do, only to find out that their partner's like, yeah, let's do that, right? So just an open, honest conversation about, what they're looking for sexually, and is their partner open to it? And if not, that's okay, right? But at least we know, right? We've had a full and thorough conversation about it.
Sure.
What about curiosity and excitement and adventure? Taking risks. How do you feel about that?
I think it's great. I think that, again, all couples, everyone has the same type of fantasies and thoughts towards sex. So you'll get a married couple and, they'll go out on the beach late at night, right? And they'll kind of find a safe spot and have sex on the beach, right? Or, they'll jump in the back seat of the car up on top of a mountain somewhere, or, just different types of things, curiosity. And then even from, just staying at home. Couples will experiment with all kinds of sexual toys and just all kinds of stuff, right? Which is fine. And we encourage that, right? Explore, have some fun. You're in a relationship with the person. That's what we want you to do. We want you to, truly explore and have a lot of fun. And doing that. And in doing that, you get to know your partner, right? Mm-hmm. What they want, what they desire. At the same time, when we're having sex, be able to guide your partner and direct your partner. Yeah, this feels good. Touch there, do this, do that. And so couples really lack, in communication on that as well.
Being vulnerable in those moments is important. It's
absolutely.
healthy.
Absolutely. We're not omniscient, right? It's not like we know. You gotta get some information here. Right.
And I think, and for men, and I'm sure it is for women too, but I kind of feel like men feel they have to dictate, control, regulate, like, hey, I'm in charge here, right? But I think being willing, we talk about influence a lot in relationships and accepting influence. And that includes, Chris, accepting sexual influence, right? Hey, I'd like this. Try this. That doesn't feel good to me. Does this feel good to you? It's kind of like sex is not eyes closed in silence, right? It's as you talked about earlier, a dance. And I think that's true. And throughout the dance, somebody's leading, somebody's following, and it's being open and inviting and intuitive about what that does. So I think that it's kind of breaking down those norms, and it's not a successful, great, wonderful, intimate relationship is defined by you and your partner, right, not by a societal norm or a movie or a porn. I think you have to define to yourselves what great sex is and achieve it together, as opposed to say, how can our relationship fit into the mold or live up to somebody else's definition of what it should be.
Yeah, I think one of the great hindrances to having really just sort of wide open sex is we've done an extremely bad job in the past. I mean, look, guys, I'm a guy of faith, but I'm going to tell you the church has done a really poor job about teaching about sex over the past couple thousand years. The Catholic Church thought it was the original sin, biggest bunch of garbage I've ever heard in my life. But the idea, I mean, we have all these things built up around sex, right? And so, there's all these social norms, mores, taboos, that then the message is kind of bad when it's not bad. It's not bad, right? And me and you can decide what we like, what works for us, and we can enjoy that time together, whatever it is we're doing, right? It doesn't have to tie into some type of social norm, more tab, nothing, right? Does it work for us? Is it pleasurable for us? Do we connect? And that's all that matters, right? But people are so bogged down. I see this with a lot of women. They're so bogged down, and the idea is like, I'm not a bad girl. Well, I mean, why, being wide open and exploring sexuality with your partner, why does that make you a bad girl, right? All the messages that have been sent, right? All the messages that have been sent. And so those things just aren't true, right? We're in healthy relationships, and we want to explore sexuality to its fullest extent. I will tell you things that get in the way, right, are past traumas, right? A lot of sexual abuse among young women, right? I think NIH reports 1 in 3, but I can tell you in 20 years, almost 100% of my clients, particularly women, have sexual abuse in their background. And I can tell you in 20 years, maybe 10 of my clients ever reported it to the authorities. So it's more like 1 in 1 experience sexual abuse, right, by adolescents. And so these things can interfere, right? They can really interfere with being vulnerable and a person's view on sexuality, right? So those are the type of things that can, really cause a problem, so to speak, right? And look, we can send people for treatment, for therapy in and around sexual trauma, and that's great, and they can get better. But I would argue there's still, a hesitancy, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's still an uncomfortableness when someone violates you at that level, right? I mean, we can certainly get better, but I think these type of things are soul wounds, right? And that become extremely hard to get past in some way. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does. That's a challenging thing to navigate in a relationship. And as you said, it's really prevalent in a lot of relationships.
Yeah.
Due to the percentage of people who are traumatized. And so what would your recommendation be to people who are really struggling with that?
Yeah. So I always make sure that the person, the offended, right, the person that the trauma happened to, I always make sure that they've had treatment, or, we get them out to treatment, trauma treatment in and around, sexual trauma. And then, for their spouse, I just say, listen, it's important that whatever they need in these moments, just be there and do that. Sometimes they need control, right? Let them have complete control in the bedroom, right? So they're not feeling, helpless or hopeless in some ways. I see that a lot. People who have experienced sexual trauma, they need to be in control of the sex, which is fine, right? We could meet our partner there and be totally fine with that. But I just say, listen, whatever your partner needs, right? Just do that, right? Just do that. At the same time, right, the person with the history of the sexual trauma has to realize their partner's not the offender, right?
Yeah.
And so this is where therapy, really is helpful. But it's a tough thing, guys. It's a very, very tough thing. And we see it every single day. And not just women. I mean, men are traumatized sexually as well. And that plays out in all kinds of different ways in relationships, right? I've seen men struggle from sort of a gender identity perspective, right? So they were molested by other men when they were little, and then they'd always date women, right? And they would struggle with this thought: am I gay or am I straight, right? And so under times of stress, when they were thinking about this, right, they would go out and they'd sleep with as many women as they possibly could, right? In some way in their mind saying, well, I'm not gay. And so it just goes back and forth. Sexuality is such a potent, powerful thing, guys. It's, remember the movie Citizen Kane, right? And the fireplace, and then it slowly is building and building and building. And, so it's the fire in the fireplace in the house, and under control, it brings warmth and comfort and love and whatnot and great surroundings to the household. When it gets out of that fireplace, it can really burn the house down in a lot of ways. And then it gets tangled up with all these messages and preconceived notions that society has thrown out there for years. One of the things that I love about the Got Sex series we were talking about is this idea of depathologizing, right? For whatever reason, my field likes to pathologize everything. And so, the thought of this, what if husband and wife are just making out and the husband has an orgasm, right? Why can't it just be, I had an orgasm? Why does it have to be some dysfunction of, premature whatever, right? And so we've so pathologized sex, right, that it just becomes, an absolute mind disaster for people. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, Chris, we talked about, you mentioned a few things of do's and don'ts, but what are the biggest intimacy killers that you've seen in your practices or research, or so people kind of know,
Don't do this.
Don't do this. What's that list include?
If we're just talking straight about sex, right? Not relationship issues so much. Don't just take your needs, right? Don't just go into this thing say, I'm just taking my needs and ignoring you, right? It doesn't work. People feel you're not there, right? You're just taking your needs and they feel used. So don't do that, right? Women feel this way a lot with their husbands, right? And then a lot of times, men feel kind of left out because, they feel their wives are just sort of staring at the ceiling, and they're not present. I'd also say, particularly for men, when there's young children in the home, realize that your wife, mom to the kids, is running around with children 24/7, 365, barely has time to take a shower. And, last thing she wants when someone gets home is someone else tugging on her, right? So take that into account and be, very much aware of that scenario. So I wouldn't go into sex just trying to take my needs, right? I definitely would say absolutely no how, no way. Do not violate boundaries, right? If we're not respecting people's boundaries, they're going to fear sundown. They're absolutely going to fear sundown, and they're going to feel sexually abused in that, right? So, we certainly can't do that. So those are my, don't do these things, right? They'll absolutely turn relationships upside down. Don't go in just taking your needs, making it all about you. And, take into account when there's young children at home, your wife is going to be a little bit tired and not as sexual.
Sure. And having the conversation about boundaries, I think a lot of people think, conversations about boundaries relative to sex is not just, hey, I'm not going to do the bondage thing, or I am. It can be, I feel good about this. I don't feel good about that. Yeah. Right. And it's understanding that so you don't either knowingly or unknowingly, right? If you haven't had the conversation and something happens and it really sends someone up into the universe, they lose it. If their conversation hasn't happened and there's not awareness, it's really tough to hold somebody to a standard they're not aware of. And
we can't ask people to violate conscience.
Yeah.
There's some things that are going to be okay for me sexually. Same with my wife. There's just stuff that's not going to be, right? And if we force the person into that, we've just entered into abuse, right? And the relationship is going to start collapsing, right? Mm-hmm. Because now you're my abuser and I fear you. That makes sense?
Yeah,
it does.
Are you struggling to maintain the emotional and physical intimacy you once shared? Do you feel like you're spending more energy finding fault and tearing your partner down instead of magnifying their good and building them up? Don't worry, you're not alone. Many couples are struggling behind a forced smile and an inauthentic happiness. You feel drained, unheard, and more often than not, unappreciated. The good news is it's not too late to rekindle the flame and strengthen your bond. I'm offering a free relationship assessment call to help you take the first step towards revitalizing your relationship and reaching your own relationship nirvana. Whether you come alone or with your partner, I'm here to help you create the space for a more fulfilling and satisfying relationship. Don't wait any longer. Make the changes you need to thrive. Book your free call today at matthewphoffman.com/coaching. And let's get started on your journey to a kick-ass relationship.
Well, and I think that, I want to go back just really quick to a small example of, fulfilling your own needs and just sort of moving on. I feel like, there are a lot of times that there will be sexual intimacy and a guy might roll over and just, okay, go to sleep. No
100%.
more words, nothing. And what I think isn't realized in that moment is that, hey, turn towards your partner, have some pillow talk. It might even lead to a round two, right? So that's an example of.
Oh, and hey, I'm gonna do a mea culpa right here. I used to, not anymore. I've learned, I've grown, I've stepped beyond it. But in our conversations that we've had, she would say, I love the intimacy and the fact that we're together. She said, but you know what I love most is the closeness afterwards, the caressing, the physicality, the talk, the conversation, bearing the emotions and the feelings. And so, she kind of said, when that is not there, I'm missing it. And so it was really important for me to learn how to do that. And I had to learn, but it came through conversation and her sharing with me, hey, this is really important to me. Because I didn't know. I thought, hey, I feel this way. She must feel that way too.
I just want to give our listeners an example of what we're talking about.
And I think the idea of foreplay leading up to sex, right, is an important part, obviously
foreplay, Chris, isn't, hey, do you want to have sex?
Right. So I think there's, I think for the most part, we want to have foreplay. Obviously couples have quickies here and there, but this idea of courting my partner, maybe throughout the day or in that evening, and building into intercourses, a preferred way. And I think the older that we get, and I'm speaking in general terms, the idea of having emotional connection becomes a primary thing just from a performance perspective, right? The idea of just feeling an emotional connection, just even to be able to perform. And then, obviously afterwards, spending time talking and not just going to sleep, right? That's kind of a turning away, right? Turning away. So
Absolutely.
I think it's, some good time to have conversation and relax, and you can fade off to sleep together as you're having conversation.
Right.
Yeah. So flirting and teasing, you're saying, is
100%.
great
I send my wife all kind of goofy memes all day long. I'll tease her. I'll send her, flirty memes and all kinds of stuff. I call her Fat Mama, PH Fat, right? And so
hot and tasty. That's the good fat, right?
We have shirts, Fat Mama and Fat Daddy, right? And we have fun. So I'll send her flirty text and flirty memes and those type of things, and we have a good time. Flirting's great. It's a way of turning toward, isn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's another deposit. So Chris, what if you had to break it down, if you had to put a line on a piece of paper and say, here's where women are and here's where men are. What do men and women have in common, or where do they differ relative to sex and intimacy and their perceptions and desires? Like, so we can understand those differences. What have you seen in your practice and on that?
I don't think, for the most part, men and women are that different, right? I think women lust a little differently than men, right? Men are undressing a woman and thinking straight, purely about sex. It's not like women don't do that, because they do, but they'll more generalized form of lusting. It's like, what would it be like to walk down the beach and have conversation, or, different things like this, right? So again, it's not that women don't lust sexually; they do. But I think, generally speaking, lust, kind of happens in a little bit different way. At least what I see here, right? What the women talk about here. Again, that's not precluding the idea that they lust sexually. They do. So I think, Matt, the real differences that I see are men are thinking about the act, right? They're thinking about just the act and having sex, and women are thinking much more about, relationally, more about the entire emotional component, right? They're thinking about connecting emotionally, connecting within the relationship, which, really kind of leads them to sexuality. It's not new news, but it's true news, right? Where men, what is it? Where can a man have sex? Roofing, right? Women are sort of kind of not that way, right? And listen, I don't beat up on men for their sex drive. I think it has to do with perpetuation of life, right? It's just kind of like an inherent internal drive for, perpetuating the species, so to speak. But I think men have just abused it through the centuries, right? They've abused it through the centuries, and a lot of damage has been done. So I think just a recognition for the guys that sex is going to be much more about just the physical act, right? I get back to the idea, this is an intermingling of two souls, right? An intermingling of two souls in this spiritual dance, right? I think is the way we really need to look at this thing. And I believe that's where you're going to find passionate sex. My soul is literally connecting with yours.
Right.
I don't know how much more passionate you could possibly get than that. Sure, all the physical sensations, that's wonderful. But if we're talking about really being filled at a sexual intimacy level, I think the idea of thinking of this idea of two souls dancing, I think that's what we shoot for. And Gottman would call that personal sex.
Yeah, love that.
So who's got it right? Can you think of examples of people who would be great mentors who are modeling all of this in the right way?
Any mentors that come to mind, in my mind, I've really had one mentor in my entire life that, really, really, really took the time and has poured into me consistently over 20, 25 years. It's a friend of mine. His name is Wales Goebel. He's like 96 years old. An old country preacher, traveling evangelist out of Alabama. And this was the first man that ever entered into my life and, took me in and just mentored me as a son. And so when my model for marriage is I always look at him and Miss Jean, his wife. And it has been a loving, caring, just the absolute quintessential picture of what relationships should be. The love and care and tenderness and kindness that they show toward each other on a day-by-day basis, the way that they treat one another, and just how they handle one another, whether in public or private, is certainly admirable for sure. Something you don't see in culture today.
Sure.
True old-fashioned couple. Really, really, really sweet people for sure. It's the only people I can think off the top of my head.
I love it.
Sure. Yeah.
That's been my only real true example of that, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I think it's good. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'd like to be that example for somebody.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think you are.
Yeah. In a lot of ways.
You've been that for us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You and Lori as well.
Yeah. There's always still lots of work to do, right? So we are always thinking about, how we can make our relationship better and just connect more. We're like everybody else, guys.
Yeah.
One thing is clear. The research is very clear. We're all in the same soup together. We all have the same struggles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
That's true.
We're all trying to figure this thing out and connect.
Yeah, the desire to make that connection. So, Chris, we've talked about, we've covered a bunch of stuff, but is there anything that we haven't talked about that we should have, or any kind of parting thoughts? Do you think things that people need to be aware of as they're approaching, how do we make it the best it can be?
I think if we're going to make sex the absolute best it can be, I have to realize and look at you as a separate human being, keyword, separate human being with your own thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And I'm going to have to turn towards those, and I'm going to have to attune, right? I'm going to have to emotionally attune. But the big thing is realizing you are a separate human being with your own thoughts, feelings, and emotions. I'm going to have to take that into consideration and deal with all of that way before we ever get to intercourse. I think that's key. Idea of seeing you as a separate, keyword, a separate human being with your own thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And I have to take all that into consideration before we're ever going to make it to the bedroom.
Yeah. It's training, it's pre-work, it's preparation, it's anything you do in life that you want to do well. You don't just say, I'm going to go do this. If it's a marathon, you're training and you're running. If it's a new product you're releasing in your company, there's trial and error, there's research, right? I mean, there's so many things, because it would be silly to say, I'm going to go run a marathon tomorrow if I haven't been running. I mean, maybe I could do it, but the damage would be horrible. So, and I think that we have to take that same approach with sex and intimacy, is how we're prepared for it, how we approach it together, and the investment of time and commitment that's leading up to it is what's going to make it what we really would desire it to be.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we haven't touched on is the idea of acceptance, right? So I've spent time getting to know you, and now I know who you truly are. Warts, scars, flaws, good things, bad things, everything in between. And I accept all of you. So I have this giant spotlight. I see you for who you truly are, and the ability to fully know you and fully accept you, right? That's the cure for shame, to be fully known and fully accepted. That's the beauty of 12-step rooms, right? And so to be able to fully know you and fully accept you, I think those are absolutely critical to produce great sex. If we're looking for two souls dancing in the night, right, to be fully known and fully accepted. And I think that's the cure for shame. And I think once that's in place, boundaries for sex expand exponentially.
Sure.
Yeah.
Exponentially, right?
Because you feel safe.
Totally. I know you completely. You know me completely, right? I'm not going to harm you in any way. You know all my goofiness. I know your goofiness. You know my great stuff. I know your great stuff, right? And we have fun. Right? We can be completely vulnerable. That's the idea. That's the idea. And that's the very thing that our soul needs, but it's the very thing that we run from because we're afraid of being shamed.
Mm-hmm.
Or exposed.
So the very cure that we need, we run from it. Right? To be fully known and fully accepted is the cure for shame. Yet we don't allow ourselves to be fully known. And in turn, the potential of being fully accepted, right? So there's always this distance. Like couples never really get to this point of really, truly connecting at soul levels because I don't fully know you. And you don't fully know me. Like I hang on to this stuff because if I tell you, you're going to think I'm a freak, right? You're going to think I'm crazy. And so I hold on to this. When in fact, we all think the same stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when we do open up and we are vulnerable, the sky's the limit. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, we're still dancing after 29 years, Chris, and it's a fun dance. And so, Chris, you are doing so many great things. We were talking a little before the episode right now. If people want to connect with you and hear more about what you're doing, where should they go? Where can they find you?
I think the easiest place to pick me up at is either couplestrong.com or nationalmarriageseminars.com. Either one of those. All the same information is going to be in either place, but that's where I'm out doing most of the work. I have my private practice, but I'm filled to the rim. It's a nonstop assault. But for more, exposure, kind of getting out there and trainings and stuff like that, nationalmarriageseminars.com or couplestrong.com. Those are the two big places.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Chris, we never get tired of talking to you. And
I love talking to you guys.
We love spending time with you, and we're so grateful for you. I just want you to know that.
Yeah, I'm grateful for you guys. I need to come up and bring some wine with me.
That's exactly right.
No, we won't turn that down. It's that thing we all hate, right? And we'll have to get that fat mama PHAT that is to come with you, so we can have a couples dance and have some more fun together.
That'd be awesome, guys.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us today. What a fun, a great topic, and we're learning, and there's so much more to learn. We haven't gotten through everything, but we appreciate you. And, we want you to remember just one last thing.
Happily ever after doesn't just happen. It's
I agree.
on purpose.
Absolutely. Discipline, commitment, right?
Discipline and commitment. There you go.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Take care,
Our
Chris.
pleasure. Thanks, Chris.
Bye.
That's all we've got for this episode of the Kickass Couples Podcast. If you like the content of this show, you'll love Matthew's newly released book, Kickass Husband, Winning at Life, Marriage, and Sex. To receive a digital mini book of quotes and images from the book, all you have to do is rate this show and leave a review in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you tune in to listen. Then email us a screenshot of your review at podcast@kickasscouplespodcast.com, and we'll get it over to you right away. Until next time, remember, happily ever after doesn't just happen, it's on purpose.